Afternoon, everybody. Jacques here from Moncton Guitar Repair, and in this video we're going to be discussing pots, also known as potentiometers. They are the things inside of your guitar that make your volume control and tone control do what they're supposed to do. What's different about them, what you can change about them, why some are more expensive than others, etc., etc. So here we go. A pot is a variable resistor, which means that as you turn the shaft of the pot, you're actually changing the resistance of the circuit. And that can change the volume or the tone of the guitar. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is called the taper. Now, the taper is how the resistance changes as the pot spins. There are three essential types of curves that you need to understand. One of them is called a logarithmic or exponential pot, and that is known as an A curve. You see A250 or A25? Yeah, A25. Well, then the second one is a B curve. This is B1 meg. And the third one, which unfortunately I don't have right here, it is what is called a C curve, which is a reverse audio taper pot. And generally speaking in guitars, that is only used for left-handed guitars. So why does the taper make a difference? Well, the problem is that the human ear hears in a logarithmic way. In order for something to be perceived as twice as loud, it takes 10 times as much energy. So these audio taper pots have most of the resistance shoved to one side. The first bunch of it basically doesn't go up at all. And then at the end, it just curves up a lot. But to our ears, that sounds like a nice straight line. Well, a linear taper pot, which is a B curve, is literally when you're at 50% of the rotation, you're at 50% of the resistance. This one here, you might be at 50% of the rotation, but only 10% of the resistance. And by the time you get to 90%, it just goes straight up. Well, there are different types of tapers. They're not all uniform, and different manufacturers have different ways of achieving that, and at the end, it doesn't matter right now. But just know that the three main companies that make pots, Alpha, Borns, and CTS, all of their tapers are different, and as you're rolling up or down your volume, it is going to sound smoother or less smooth, depending upon the type of taper that is in the pot itself. Second thing I want to talk about is resistance. This is a 25K pot. Now that means 25,000 ohms. Ohms is the measure of resistance. A 25K pot is generally speaking only used for active pickups like EMGs, the Seymour Duncan blackouts, or the Fishman Fluence pickups. The A250 or the 250K pots, generally speaking, they are used on single coil pickups, or the JBE, also known as Joe Barden pickups. Even though they're humbucking pickups, they really should be used with a 250K pot. And now we've got the 500K pot. The 500K pot is generally used for humbuckers. Now, if you have a relatively dark sounding single coil, you could put in the 500K pot and it will brighten it up, because the higher the resistance, the brighter the sound. The lower the resistance, the darker the sound. Now, if you have a really dark guitar, then you could put in a 1 meg pot. Now, I wouldn't use a B curve. It just happens to be one that I would have. I would still have an A1 meg pot, and that means 1 million ohms. And that will be as bright as pretty much any pickup is going to ever be in your guitar. If you want the brightest pickup you can get, that's what you want right there. And then, but by varying these, you can get different types or different sounds, different tones. The next thing I'd like to discuss is something called tolerance. Now, tolerance is a variance. Basically, most pots are within plus or minus 20%, which means that this pot could be 25% higher value than it's supposed to be, or 25% lower value than it's supposed to be, and still be shipped out the door like it's supposed to be, or like it says. Like this one here is a 1 meg pot. Well, this pot could be 800K or 1200K and shipped out the door as a 1 meg pot. Well, that is a drastic difference, and it is going to change the tone of your guitar. So that's why whenever you're removing a pot from a guitar, for whatever reason, you should always measure it with your multimeter, and then you know what's coming out, and then you can make the decision after the fact or before you put in the new pot. If you find your guitar is a little bright, put in a pot that's a little bit a lower value. If you put in if you find the guitar is a little dark, put in a pot that's a little bit higher value, and then you can kind of just tailor the brightness of the sound to your liking. Next comes the actual shaft of the pot. You have a solid shaft, which means that literally the shaft itself is a solid hunk of metal. Now, the knob that you have to put on that has what's called a set screw. It's a little either Allen head or tiny little standard screwdriver. Bang, and it goes in here and it presses up against this and holds the pot, or holds the knob tight. Then you have another kind of shaft, and that's called a knurled shaft. Now you see these little tiny things. They are grooves that go into the grooves in the plastic pot. Now, most Strats and Les Pauls have these. Telecasters and usually Ibanez have these kind here, just for example. Now, these arms here can actually bend, and so if the pot or if the knob is a little loose, you can kind of take them out or expand them, but just be careful because they do sometimes have a tendency to break if you move them too much. Which brings me to my next point. This pot here, this is what is called a push-pull pot, because literally you take the shaft of it and pull it and push it. And what that does, that activates this little thing right here, and that is a switch. And you can use that for a bunch of different things. You can use this for a phase switch between your two pickups. You can actually do a series parallel on a 5-conductor humbucker, or you can even do a coil tap on a humbucker. Or if you're using a Strat, you can do what I like to refer to as the 7-sound Strat mod, and that will allow you, depending upon how you hook it up, the way that I like to do it is I take and I hook my bridge pickup to this, and it turns the bridge pickup on in any position at all. So if you're on position 4, which is just which is your middle and neck together, you turn this on, and bang, now you've got all 3 because it's turning the bridge pickup on. If you're in position 5 on your switch and you turn on the neck, and it's just the neck pickup, do that, and instantly now you have your bridge and neck together just like a Telecaster. Okay, it works really well. And this is a CTS one. There are other brands as well, but I like this one. It seems to be the most robust. Some of the other ones with the square metal back, I find them, if you're not careful, you can accidentally overheat them and it'll burn out the switch part. I've never had that happen with one of those. I really like these. They're not super expensive. They're, about double the price of a regular pot, but they do work incredibly well, even though they are a little bit on the big side, which brings me to my next point, the physical size of the pots. These are 24 millimeter, these are 16 millimeter. There is absolutely no functional difference between the two. It just depends upon size, the size of the cavity they're being put in. 99% of the time, this pot is going to be just fine, or the 24 millimeter. It is the most common guitar size, unless you've got like a really cheap import guitar. They do tend to have the smaller size, but if you can get a good quality one like this one, this is a Bourne's one, which is one of my two favorite. I love the CTS pots and the Bourne's pots. They're great. But this one here, if I'm doing something like doing a Brent Mason model Telecaster with 2 volumes and a tone control and the switch on that tiny little Telecaster plate, there's no space for 3 of these big boys. There's only space for these tiny ones, so I have no choice but to use these. I would take out all of them and put in these tiny ones because that's the only way that you're going to be able to fit all of that in. These ones are just too big. But yeah, these are great, but there's no functional difference between these at all. Which brings me to my next point, is the stiffness of the rotation. Bourne's pots, generally speaking, have a much freer rotating shaft, okay? Now, CTS, they tend to pride themselves on being rather stiff to operate, okay? Now, that's a personal preference thing. If you're the type of player that doesn't use your volume control very often, and you're just sort of turn it up on 10, set it and forget it, well, the stiffer shaft would be great because you're going to be far less likely to accidentally hit the knob and move your volume control or move your tone control as you're playing. Well, if you're like a lot of country guitar players who do a lot of volume swells to try to mimic the sound of a steel guitar, this pot here with the much freer rotating shaft will be able to do that a lot smoother and a lot easier than the CTS pot. So, you know, choose the type of pot or that you like the rotation of. There's no real benefit one way or the other than it works more appropriately for what you want. Which brings me to my next point, is the actual conductive material. Now, I don't have one of these types of pots. There's basically two essential types of resistant materials. On the inside of the pot is actually like a semicircle, and on pots like this, it's a carbon-based resistor or carbon-based resistive material, and it's open. You can see here, and sometimes dirt and dust and stuff can get on there, and then every once in a while you have to take a little bit of contact cleaner and spray it in there and clean it out, and 99% of the time you're fine, everything works. But every once in a while it'll kind of build up so far that it's not going to fix itself. Well, Bourne's has I will put a picture up here with a picture of what they actually look like, and the actual resistor material is a conductive polymer, and it is a totally sealed pot. So the conductive polymer does not get corroded, and because it is sealed, there's no dirt and dust that can get in there, and they're basically forever pots. They are significantly more expensive. They're about 2 to 3 times the price of a regular pot like this. But if you've got a guitar like a hollow body, like a 335 or something like that, that doesn't have, or to change the pots is relatively difficult, you would rather use one of those types of pots, because basically if you do need to change them, you change them once and you're basically done for life. Now, a lot of people talk about or ask me about pot quality. Okay, what is it going to do to the tone? Electrons don't care. As long as the resistance is exactly the same. This particular pot right here is 500K. This particular pot is 500K. This is made by or sold by WD. This one is a Bourne's pot, 2 totally different manufacturers. If I put them on my multimeter and they tested exactly the same, they won't sound any different, period. A lot of people will try to tell you that. It's not, okay? Generally speaking, the import pots, the cheaper ones, they do tend to be under spec, and that will make the guitar a little darker. So when you put in the quote-unquote better quality pots, the resistance generally is higher. So it's gonna make the signal or make the sound of your guitar brighter. And a lot of people interpret that as, ooh, extra clarity, it's a better quality pot. But even a company like Suhr that make $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 guitars, they use alpha pots, which are made in China, and no one complains. Yes, CTS is sort of the de facto standard for Fender Mexico and Fender USA and Gibson USA and a bunch of other companies. Sure, they've been around forever, but if you have something else in your guitar, don't worry about it. If you just buy like a cheap 50 cent or 75 cent alpha pot, you'll be fine. Just test the resistance and you'll be okay. The big thing that you're going to notice is the longevity. The cheaper pots, they do tend to get crackly or scratchy a little bit sooner than other pots, but other than that, that's it. So that pretty much wraps up everything you're going to need to know with regards to pots themselves. There's a lot of misinformation floating around the internet that, frankly, I don't necessarily like. People can maybe disagree with me if they want, but I've been doing this for nearly 30 years, and I've got my degree in electronics engineering. These pots are fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a $30 expensive pot. Anyways, anyone's got any questions, put them down in the comments. If you like what you hear and you like what you see, you like the information I'm providing, please subscribe, ring the notification bell. Appreciate all you guys' support. You have yourself a wonderful day, and I'm out.